Welcome to the Kings Beat podcast. I'm James Hamby, Kings Insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. Joining me, Fox 40's Sean Cunningham. Sean, how are you?
I'm okay.
Fair to middling.
Happy New Year, everyone. You like the rain now, huh? Do you? I'm getting all kinds of shit over my hatred of the rain. Who told you? It's absolutely pissing out there, and
Flooding and
man, get your sandbags.
Get your sandbags. Okay, and of course we're joined by Brendan Nunez from the Kings Pulse podcast. Brendan, how are you?
Good. I'm feeling pretty Cunningham today. Very much in this hatred of the rain. New Year's Eve was a mess. The roads were, it was just a mess all around.
Yeah, we drove down to Rockland to stay with some friends and hang out and have a little New Year's Eve party, and it was a torrential downpour. Like that was braving the elements. I was slightly concerned with my son driving, and then one of our boats tried to float away. One of our many boats tried to float away, and
Good
so
thing you have a fleet.
I'm like, it's on a lift. How could that happen? I go out to check it out, and the dock itself was about 8 inches underwater. And I'm like, oh, that's not good. I had to like pull my pant legs up, climb out there in the freezing cold water, and make sure everything was tied off securely. Wild what's happening with it. I don't even know how many like inches of rain we've had, but it's some severe weather warning stuff.
I know we need the rain. Do we still? Are we out of it? Are we done yet?
We're never
Are we back?
The
No?
drought. Folsom Lake is still a puddle. Like, come on. We got a long ways to go before that happens.
Okay.
And then we have Jeremy Renner, critically injured in a freak snowblower accident. I don't even know what happened there, but that doesn't sound good at all. I don't know. We don't have any details yet, but hopefully up in Lake Tahoe, not too far from here. So
From
right.
Mount Rose. He's at the Reno area now. At the hospital in Reno.
Yeah, not good at all.
Well, Modesto's own Jeremy Renner.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know he's from Modesto. Okay.
Yeah. And he's a big 49er fan. Huge. His parents own like the bowling alley or a bowling alley in Modesto. So the more you know.
Interesting. That's it. You know, I didn't. They put a big giant bowling alley and movie theater and arcade at the Galleria, which I haven't been to yet, but I kind of refuse to go to the mall. All right, well, let's get to basketball talk. First of all, if you're watching today on the YouTube, if you don't mind, give us a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not a subscriber already. Subscribe to the Kings Beat. Become a premium subscriber to the Kings Beat. We're creating massive amounts of content every week for your consumption. And we will have an off the record with the Kings Beat virtual happy hour in the month of January, and you do not want to miss that. That should be a blast because all of them seem to have really worked out well. Let's see.
Oh.
I wasn't sure if it was just me.
Oh, no, it was definitely him. James decided to leave us. There, he's back now. He's shaking
I'm
his
back.
head.
Yeah, so this is some frozen ham, is what they call it on ESPN 1320.
Oh, this is a thing?
Yeah, it's a thing. Like every once in a while, because we never have this as an issue, because we're doing the podcast at different times. I think only one time we've had real internet issues, so hopefully it doesn't continue. But since we last hung out, which was Thursday, right? The Kings had a big win on Friday night, and then I don't know. How do you guys describe this loss to the Memphis Grizzlies?
Expected. I mean, that's the second best team in the West currently. They were sitting atop the Western Conference for a couple of weeks, it seemed. They know how to win without key members of their roster, and they're just a really well-oiled, tight unit. And I felt like Sacramento played pretty decently for much of the game. Fourth quarter just kind of slipped away from them. Steven Adams was a monster. Ja Morant was Ja Morant, and you probably wanted to see some better performances from some of your key guys, De'Aaron Fox included, and I just felt like it went about the way I would have expected it to go. But I also feel like it's kind of worth a broader discussion just about how kind of this team is playing right now. I mean, they edge Utah by 1 point. Certainly, Utah's been a formidable team in the West, kind of surprising a lot of people. And then before that, we documented how well that how that series with the Nuggets went. The 2-game back-to-back. You split that series, and you have these weird comebacks. And as entertaining as the Kings have been, it feels like they're not quite right at the moment. There's a lot of clunkiness that's around them. But I felt like for the most part, they've been able to overcome a lot of little hurdles, if you will, that kind of build up through a game. And I was hopeful for Kings fans that coming out of the Denver game that would have kind of helped get their mojo back. And part of that was Domantas Sabonis being back. And you see the way they played in Utah. I remember looking at James at one point, against Utah. It was here in Sacramento to close out the homestand. They win that game, pretty dramatic fashion, obviously. But I remember looking at you, James. I go, I feel like the Kings have been playing really, really well, and they just can't stop Utah. Like Utah's on their A game. Feels like this one's going to be one that comes down to the wire and might get away from them. Fortunately, the Kings gutted it out, and I thought it was pretty impressive the way they did. I know there's some people that'll say that it shouldn't have gotten that close, but you take that kind of clunkiness out on the road, maybe you find yourself a little bit. It's a 2-game road trip before you come back, and you've got a lot more games at home. I feel like it kind of went the way I expected, and Utah is kind of funny. The next night they lose another heartbreaker to Miami, so you're going to get them on Tuesday as we record this on Monday, and I feel like the Kings have to kind of find themselves with this day off and maybe try to correct a lot of things that haven't kind of gone well.
The defense is still an issue for this Kings team. There's times where they look better, but I think that those bright spots are less common than the typical things that honestly we've kind of seen throughout years past. I thought in that first quarter against Memphis, like fouling was a huge issue. And they cleaned that up as the game went along, but there were so many free throw attempts specifically for John Morant at the beginning of that game. And I thought that really helped him get in a rhythm. And, they ended up shooting okay last night against the Grizzlies, 15 of 43 from 3, 34%. But the amount of stretches that this team has of struggling to score when they have 3 or 4 guys that are 40% 3-point shooters is really confusing to me. I think there were 2 4 or 5 minute stretches in that Memphis game where they did not score. And I thought some of their shots were okay. There were stretches of turnovers being an issue, and live ball turnovers have been an issue for this team all year long because their transition defense after the fact is subpar. So I think Fox's total numbers don't look horrible. It's really those 5 turnovers to me that are tough. Malik had 4 turnovers as well in his 26 minutes. I thought that those 2 guys, when it came to just taking care of the ball, could have been a lot better. And then that hurts you defensively on the other end. But I think the defensive struggles aren't anything all too surprising. And even offensively, Memphis came in as the second best defense, according to Basketball Reference, one of the better defensive teams in the league. And I thought they held their own and did a decent job of making this a competitive game throughout the course of it. But we just keep seeing the Kings, the nights that they're playing these really good teams, everything kind of has to go right. They have to make sure that they're cleaning up these weaknesses because they've been good against below 500 teams. They're 10-3. And 2 of those are that Charlotte and Washington games that we've seen recently that were just total messes. But they're 9-13 against teams 500 and above. And Memphis obviously falls into that, which I think is an okay record for where this team is at and continuing to progress and build on what admittedly was a low starting point of last year and years prior. But I thought the offense is just a little bit confusing to me at times when they struggle to score with how dynamic and versatile this team is when it comes to spacing and playmaking and all that. But there were just the same typical issues to me of fouling, turnovers, and defense.
Yeah, so the Memphis game very specifically, I thought, first of all, the first stretch was 0 of 14 from the field between the late first quarter and early second. I think there are nights where, Mike Brown has to figure something else out where his starters are playing too well. And then when he goes to the bench, all things go to hell in a handbasket. Losing Sabonis off the court, it's become one of those things where you just can't get over it. The way this team functions with Sabonis on the court versus with him off the court has to be addressed. In my opinion, we're 35 games into the season, we can't keep thinking that someone is going to all of a sudden magically become someone that they're not. Like that's not the way it goes. So it's at a certain point, which we'll have a discussion about trade deadline and about like January, like guarantees and stuff later in the show. But I really do think we're at a moment where you see where the Kings are. You see that like there's this stretch coming up where they could really, really like take off because it's an easy stretch of games, and I hate saying that, but it is. But at the same time, you just keep thinking, we know what they're missing. Like, can you go get it? Is there a way to go get it? Is, you're going to, I think at this point, you're trying to decide between, do I make a major move that's long term and risk a little bit of chemistry, but the risk reward is to come out with a much better player that fits long term age wise? Or do you tinker and add 2 smaller pieces or 3 smaller pieces that could help tighten up the rotation? I don't like Monty McNair is going to be in a really tough decision here, but it comes back to this same thing. Like the clunkiness it's almost always when Sabonis is out of the court, is off the court. They had a lull both in the first half and the second half, and the one in the second half basically cost you the game where you just couldn't score again. 5 minutes without scoring. And it's really frustrating to watch this team go through those phases. But then it's even like you put Sabonis back in, and it's like a minute or two of everyone standing around again, like not being able to readjust to Sabonis being back. So I don't know. I thought it was interesting. I also like John Morant. I'm just gonna like I probably will draw the ire of plenty of people. He's like really, really dangerously getting close to like James Harden annoyance level for me. I don't know if that's the.
What do you mean?
I can't stand the fake, the acting. Like, man, just play the game. Like the whole the head bobbing and his throwing his head around and drawing fouls all the time. Like to me, like
gosh.
at some point he's so good. Just go play. Stop doing the flop every single time. And I don't know how if that works out on a nightly basis, but I always feel the same. Like when James Harden was in his prime, I couldn't handle watching it. But he dribbled the
man.
air out of the ball. He did, and so I prefer Morant because of his athleticism to watching Harden. But still, like at a certain point, it's kind of like Luka. Like, do you really want to watch 48 minutes of a guy like crying to officials?
That was actually the one I was going to follow it up with. I was like, I mean, sarcastically, it's do you watch the NBA? Because there's many guys like this, and you don't have to look much farther than the guy that's, just putting up 50 games like they're pedestrian games at this point and doing what he's doing in not only, I mean, just Luka Doncic has been incredible. And then, of course, he's like taking it out on his teammates as well. And, it's borderline MVP stuff if Jokic hasn't been doing what he's been doing, and there might be Denver being as good as they are, and Jokic putting up just incredible numbers as a 2-time MVP already. But yeah, Luka is probably the most exciting player in the NBA, dare I say, right now. And if you hate watching that, you must really hate watching Luka Doncic, man.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know. Am I crazy, Brennan? Did you watch the same thing I did? Like, and I guess the better question is, are you kind of disappointed that De'Aaron Fox doesn't just like, okay, whatever, I got to do this myself. I've got to start flopping. I've got to start like watching like Kevin Martin tapes and like trying to draw fouls on every single play. I mean, is that where we're at, where the game just has to look bad in order for you to be a superstar?
I don't know. Like, I mean, I think that it is just part of the NBA at this point. I actually didn't think Jaws was horrible last night. There's definitely, when you're jerking your head back is the one that really gets me, when you're just barely getting hit and you're just jerking your head back like crazy. Like, there's some that just look a little bit ridiculous, right? But I tend to think it's just part of the game at this point. I think if De'Aaron acted a little bit more, maybe he could get more calls. I think there's also an aspect of the Grizzlies are just a team that have a little bit more respect. And so I think that maybe as the Kings continue to get better, that maybe De'Aaron does get more of those calls, because I certainly think he should get more. But wasn't really like what last night came down to in my mind. I think one of the other things we didn't mention is this 21 offensive rebounds, which, like, how in the world do you give up 21 offensive rebounds and 13 of them being from Steven Adams?
I was going to say his name is Steven Adams.
His name is Steven Adams.
It's ridiculous. And Sabonis is one of the Kings have been the best defensive rebounding percentage team all year long. Sabonis is one of the best rebounders in the league. He's leading the leagues in rebounds per game. Sabonis was part of the group that was out there while Steven Adams was doing his thing. And it goes further than Domas, actually. Obviously, it's not just that matchup. It's when Domas is getting engaged in defense, the other guy needs to come over and help and make sure Adams isn't securing that. But I think that there's also an aspect of, sure, Jaw is maybe a little out there with it and is baiting the whistle sometimes or just accentuating the contact, but the Kings are a little bit handsy out there sometimes too and don't exactly do themselves any favors in my mind.
Well, it's the NBA, man. You're going to have deception all over the place. I mean, it's not... It honestly doesn't bother me because I've just kind of accepted it at this point in life in the NBA because everyone wants it's such a league that isn't what you fell in love with, be it in the 80s, 90s, or even early 2000s, or even any of that. Like depending on how old you are, this is almost unrecognizable to the folks that fell in love with NBA decades ago. So, but it's still a fantastic game. It's still a lot to like. It's a different game for sure. And this just kind of comes along with it. And I think the art of deception is, look, when people say, is this what De'Aaron Fox has to do or whatever, you kind of have to accept people for who they are now because it's not like all of a sudden somebody's going to add that to their game. Kevin Martin was a wizard at it. He came into the league knowing the nuances of how to do that. James Harden is the same way. You don't really get guys that are 5 years into their career and all of a sudden become like a master at being able to draw fouls. So I also think, Memphis gets a lot of credit because they do a brilliant job of really defending and they do so without fouling and they have a physicality to them. And, there were some calls that didn't go their way. That's certainly not why they lost the game. But the scoring droughts, to me, were probably among the most puzzling because everything we talk every week about how I always say it, like it or not, your identity is being this high pace, efficient scoring team, and that's where your bread is buttered. And to see Memphis kind of crack the code and have not one lengthy scoring drought, but two, one of which I think were both of them more than 5 minutes, or was it just one? I think it was the second quarter,
like 4.5 minutes. The second one was at least 4.5 minutes of
and the second quarter went over 5. I mean, you're talking about almost 10 minutes probably where they didn't score the basketball, and
they missed the final 10 shots at the first quarter.
Yeah, and you still were, you didn't have a deficit that didn't go. They pushed a 14-point deficit by the end of the fourth quarter. When I say this is the way I thought it would go, that's not what I expected. I think that was, of course, what was going to be the most surprising. However, I didn't expect them to win this game. So my whole thing is to go out there and hopefully you can win one of two on the road, go 500. I think the other thing is it's not like, you're hoping to see this team start to get some of these wins against teams that are above 500. And that's maybe among the most alarming things that we've seen this season around the Kings is just their inability to really compete. I mean, they've competed, they've taken down the wire, but they just haven't been able to get out many wins against winning basketball teams.
Yeah, but I mean, just think back. I mean, they did beat Denver. They did beat Utah, who at the time was a winning basketball team.
Toronto.
Yeah, they've had some solid. I think what are they 5-9 against teams with above 500 records? Maybe it's around there.
Yeah, it's not great for what this team is accomplishing. Now the good news is they're taking care of business in the games that they'll come into a game being the favorite in. So they're not like giving those games away, which is fantastic. But
outside of Washington and Charlotte,
and those are certainly that's going to happen. Like you're going to lose a couple of those every single year. My whole thing is I think I'd like to start to see that regardless of the steps that this team takes defensively, and I think they fell to 24th after. I think their peak was 14 or 15 defensively. How high did it reach? Do you remember?
Yeah, maybe 16.
16.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean now they're back down to 24th, and it's again it's going to be it's going to be like this for a while. But I want to see them to be able to continue to do what they do well. James, you mentioned about relying on Domas so much, and it's true. And a lot of guys, you don't like to see teams lose their best player and just see everything go to trash. I mean, Denver is kind of that way. We talked about it. Like when Jokic is off the floor, that team does not nearly look the way they do when he's on the floor, obviously, and so much so that like there's a big significant drop off. The Kings can't be one of those teams if they're going to compete, so they have to be able to find a way to sustain and to be able to hold onto the rope, as James likes to say and Dave Yeager likes to say. But I don't know. In my opinion, it's not De'Aaron Fox turning into something he's not. Like you kind of know what he is. What you need is Malik Monk to be right night in, night out. You need the shooting to in the playmaking to be able to move. You need the ball to be able to move. And I think the defense has kind of done their job more times than not. I think it's been pretty impressive, particularly with that second unit. But it's really kind of funny to see the playmaking kind of stagnate when he gets off the floor, because early in the season you weren't seeing that.
Yeah, looking at the offensive ratings on and off court, when Domantas Sabonis, according to Basketball Reference, when he's on the court, the Kings' offensive rating is a 120.1. When he steps off the court, it's 108.4. So he's a plus 11.7. And then when you mix that with the opponent's offensive rating, which is 15.2 with him on the court, 115.2 and 115. So the team only gets like 0.2 better when he's off the court, like defensively, which is, it's within like that. It is what it is. I mean, it's right there. So, it's just crazy to me that what we're seeing is that when he's off the court, like your offense just is very, very mundane. Your turnover percentage spikes, your assist percentage drops, your, overall field goal percentage drops. So one crazy thing I'll point out is the Kings, somehow their defensive rebound percentage goes up when Domas is off the court, which to me is just like, I don't understand how that's possible.
At what point do we start to question, should you play differently when you don't have Domas out there? It's not long, but there's not many guys that can do it. Like Rashawn Holmes and Davion Mitchell are pick and roll players offensively in my mind. I think that's where they strive. And at what point is it maybe we're just running pick and roll with Rashawn and Davion, or Rashawn and De'Aaron? Do we? I understand the logic behind wanting to play the same way. You don't want to have to. I mean, it's the whole the ball is power, right? If you're running pick and roll, this doesn't become this same everybody touches it offense that we're accustomed to. But I don't know. At some point, I feel like it's worth asking, should you still try to play the same way when Domas isn't out there?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Brenna. You asked a question of Mike Brown in pregame, maybe 4 or 5 games ago, about the difference between Domas and the difference between playing Nimi at the center. And it was the conversation was that they do a bunch of DHOs off of Sabonis, where, guys are coming off, and Sabonis is making the decision. He has the ball in his hands, and guys are cutting, they're moving all around him, and he's either handing it off. And he said, when we switch to when we switch to Neemias, we don't really run a lot of different stuff. The only difference is that Neemias is a pick and roll player, so it's a true pick as opposed to a DHO, and that means that the guard is making the decision with the ball and not the center. And it's really interesting because it's almost like they aren't figuring out how to do that when Sabonis, the guards aren't playing well enough as offensive players to make the offense continue to flow. It really does. What it feels like, if Malik Monk isn't hot, you're totally screwed with your second unit. And I don't know how to get around that. Because guys like Trey Lyles, they're I think Trey's been absolutely tremendous over this stretch, but he's such he's a player that has to have other players making him better, right? He's not a player who's going to go out there and create for himself, create for others a bunch. He's just not. And you can start saying the same thing about Rashawn Holmes or whoever you put at the center position. They can't create, so you end up having this staggered lineup all the time. And so I don't know what the answer is, because even Harrison Barnes isn't really creating for himself when he's on the court without Fox and without Sabonis. I mean, you have to address it in some way, and whether that's like switching up your offensive sets or it's just going out and getting someone who can actually do the job. And I don't know how difficult that's going to be. I don't know how much that's going to cost you. But like every game that Mark Williams blows up in Charlotte and has a humongous game is a day that if I'm the Kings, I'm one step closer to trying to get Mason Plumlee. You know, like, hey, go ahead, play well, young fella. Your team is bad. You know, the Kings need someone that can actually step in and play the role. And then, like, when you have a game like last night, which is a total anomaly, like the offensive rebounding of last night, the Kings are the best defensive rebounding team percentage-wise in the NBA. Like they have been almost the entire season. So every once in a while, you're going to get beat up by literally the strongest man in the NBA while your center has a broken thumb and can't push the guy around using his hands. So, I mean, those things are going to happen, but I don't know. Where are you guys at with that?
I mean, I think that any backup center that you try to acquire, like if you're trying to duplicate Domas, I just don't know that it's ever happening. You know, like even on a lesser scale, like, and especially if we feel like at least I feel like one of the biggest weaknesses of this team is rim protection. Like if you're looking for a rim protector, how many rim protectors can also distribute in the way that Domas can? And I actually think one of the most underrated aspects of Domas and the difference between him and these backup bigs is just the screen setting. Like Neemias is the closest, but Rashawn's screens don't hit anywhere close to the same as Domas's. Mezzi's obviously don't. Alex Len is just not understandably not getting that much opportunity. I think there's other issues there when it comes to his ideal fit with this team, but there's just not many guys I think that can duplicate that. Like I've thrown out like Nerlens Noel, for example, as like a defensive guy that wouldn't cost much. And I know we have varying opinions on that guy, but just as an example. But then I think the other end is like a Kelly Olynyk, and who I think can do similar things offensively as Domas, but you're totally sacrificing the defensive end. And I'm a believer that don't try to clean up your weaknesses and in the process lose your strengths. So maybe you just fully commit to the offense, and it's something like a Kelly Olynyk, who has this year remaining and then next year has $12 million, only $3 million of it is guaranteed. Like I think that he's somebody that fits offensively similarly, lets you play the same style, but you're totally forfeiting the defense.
Yeah, I mean, I even looked at it last night. Like, man, if Brandon Clark could have played, it probably would have hurt them because Adams was so good, and Adams just doesn't play that type of minutes. But with Brandon Clark out, they needed the big rebounder. They needed a guy to go in there and battle with Sabonis. If you would have switched those out, there's no way that Brandon Clark would have had that many offensive rebounds.
You know what was wild too about Steven Adams that occurred to me? Like, how many minutes did he play? It was like 35?
Yeah, 35. That's what
it was his second consecutive 20 rebound game. He had 21 against New Orleans, and he did that in 27 minutes against a team that has a little bit more, bulk, obviously, with Zion Williamson and probably more physicality, I think. But and then the game before that, right? And then the game before that at Toronto, he had 17 boards in also 32 minutes. So it's like they seem to have cracked a code a little bit with him because he's obviously been so important to their offense, but like not like that. Like the rebounding is there, the defense is there. He's obviously a key cog there, but it hasn't been he hasn't been like this like in a while. And crazy thing too is isn't he like under 30? And it seems like he's been in the league forever.
He has been in the league forever. Yeah, he is 29. That's absolutely incredible that he's 29.
I remember his draft workout.
Yeah, I remember his draft workout too. And also
he looked. By the way, he also looked a ton different. I almost use a curse word. He looks way different now than he did then. I mean, he looked like he was. If you think of like the All-American boy crew cut coming out of the Army, only he's from New Zealand, and then you look at him now and he looks like Aquaman. It's like completely different, night and day.
What's crazy is he's averaging a career best 11.2 rebounds per game right now. He's never last season was the first year he was ever over 10 rebounds a game, and a lot of that's because he played in Oklahoma with Russ Westbrook, who just stole all of the rebounds. But this is a guy averaging 5.1 offensive rebounds per game, and so it's not like it's an anomaly that he went out there and killed you on the offensive glass. It was just the sheer bulk of them down the stretch where he literally the Kings got 4 defensive stops in a row, and he got the rebound every time, and you're still on defense. I mean, they spent like a minute and a half in crucial like moments of the game playing defense because Steven Adams kept ripping down an offensive board and resetting the whole thing. It was wild. Like again, yeah, there's nothing you can do about it sometimes. Sometimes a guy just has one of those games where the ball goes to him, where he's able to get in position, where he figures out something about one of your players that he can master and take over a game like that. And I thought it was intriguing to watch, though. I mean, he's such a beast. And it does look like he's having like a revitalization in his career. But again, you're talking about a guy who could not do the things that Sabonis does on the offensive end and as a passer and all that stuff. So,
and there's no Steven Adams in Utah. So, like, if they split this, and you obviously saw some of the clunkiness, and it's a result of Steven Adams. Well, not every team has a Steven Adams, fortunately. So, there can be some get right there, but also, Utah's gonna be looking at payback in that game.
And Memphis is just good. Like, Memphis is
Right.
a really good team.
That's what I'm saying.
15-3 at home. What are those
They
losses
were
to the Kings?
They were among the best teams in the NBA. They were top of the Western Conference for, I think, 3 weeks. So, and that was still without Desmond Bane, who also didn't play last night. So, and Desmond Bane was an all-star player before he went out. I mean, he was playing incredible, averaging like 28, I think, 28, 29 points a game, like crazy.
yeah, Memphis is only a game behind Denver for the number 1 spot. They're the number 2 spot in the Western Conference. Yeah, I mean, they really are playing absolutely phenomenal basketball.
So is Lauri Markkanen, by the way.
Yeah, what do you do if you're the Kings? Because to me, a little bit of the Markkanen thing was you hadn't seen him. Like, you hadn't seen this version of Lauri or Lowry Markkanen. That I guess that's how you say it.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Lowry.
Either way.
It's
I'm
Lowry.
going to call
'cause
him
that's-
Lauri until
yeah,
he's a king, and I can ask him.
Lowry
the,
Bird.
The jazz folks says you have to get used to it, but it's just like Kyle Lowry. He said he goes by Lowry. I'm like, all right. Anyway, it kind of felt like the Kings just were like feeling it out. Like, what is this thing? Who is this? And then all of a sudden he was really, really good. And you're like, oh, that's the guy that everyone wants us to spend all of our draft picks on and go swing for the fences with. Which I'm on board with that. I'm part of that crew of, like, if you can get Lauri Markkanen, he would look absolutely spectacular next to Domantas Sabonis. But yeah, like, we go into this game, the Jazz they're pretty solid though from top to bottom. I mean, they have veterans all over the court. It's not like it's a super young team. And I know, like, some of their beat writers, they watch Jared Vanderbilt on a game in and game out basis. They're not super impressed with him, and I didn't think he looked great against the Kings. I don't even know what his final stat line was, but that's a team that if you're looking for trade partners, you're probably trying to sift through and see what you can pick up, right?
Well, yeah, and then they're linked to John Collins just as much as the Kings have been, and almost more so recently. And I guess, like, I could see it, sure, but I think they need to upgrade in some other positions. To be honest, like, I think they need to look more guard play. I mean, Mike Conley is not Mike Conley anymore, so like, they fortunately, I mean, I think everyone thought that they were, I mean, us included, thought that they were not going to be this factor at all in the Western Conference, and we're still not even halfway through the season yet, so there still could be a moment to where that does happen, but they don't look like they're going anywhere, and Markkanen looks like an all-star right now. In fact, it's kind of funny, I've already seen paraphernalia and what do we call it, swag coming away from the Utah Jazz to promote him for all-star consideration.
Yeah, the finisher, right, with a couple of ends. Yes.
Yeah, because he's the one Finland guy.
It's propaganda.
The one Finnish player in the league.
Yes.
No,
I mean, I think that Lauri is obviously one of the prizes of, if you're like looking from a Kings perspective, of who you could possibly see as intriguing as a trade candidate, right? I think that Olynyk, I mentioned earlier, interests me a little bit. Obviously, vastly different prices. And I think Vanderbilt still interests me. It just seems like maybe the price would be a bit much, and I don't know that he changes like the tier that Sacramento is in necessarily. So I think those are three guys. But I think, again, we might have had this conversation last episode. I don't remember. Like, if you're talking marketing, like, this is probably including Keegan Murray in the deal. And I don't know how many people are willing to do that. But
Would
He
you?
said it. He said it again.
Yes. Like, I think we said this last time. Like, if Keegan Murray became Lauri Markkanen, you would be thrilled. No?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, like, you take the sure thing. I know the team control is the big difference, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Team
I
control,
said-
low salary, and you know, if you think that he's capable of being Lauri Markkanen by year 2 or 3, then you're even more thrilled with that.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm looking at marketing 16.5 million this year, 17.3 million next year, and 18 million the year after that. So basically, he's Sabonis money for another 2 years after this year. I mean, it's like dirt cheap for him. You remember,
it's pretty good.
like I kept saying, like, why is he not signing, and why are the Kings not going out there and trying to sign him? They had the MLE. No one else had the MLE. You might have been able to come up with a little bit more money or figured out something with the sign and trade with the Bulls, but this was a restricted free agent that his team no longer had any cap space for, and whether he's healthy or not, it just like made so much sense. And then, of course, you know, the Cavs swoop in and get him for nothing, and then they're able to go turn him into like gold in Donovan Mitchell, and like his career path is very, very strange. Of course, his injuries and stuff like that have slowed him down. But the product that we're seeing right now at age 25 is spectacular. And the fact that he fits into the Kings' age arc perfectly, man, it would be tough. But you're right, Brennan. It's either going to cost you like 2 or 3 first-round picks, or it's going to cost you Keegan and a first-round pick and, you know, salary filler. But he's obtainable because of the low salary, the 16.5 million. That's crazy. I mean, you only have to come up with like 14 million in salary. You could just salary match.
That also Utah wants. Like, it's not just come up with the money. You got to make sure that they want it as well.
No, I get what you're saying there, but like if you're doing salary match and then picks, which is what Utah seems to have been intrigued by, then it's really easy to get to a 16.5 million without even like destroying like your inner workings, without messing with the flow of what you have going on. So, I mean, if you can do it without a Keegan Murray, but again, what's it going to cost you? 2 firsts and a pick swap or something? And the Kings don't have any availability until like 2027, right? So it's a while before they could actually offer. They could offer 27 and 29 and a pick swap in 23, or a floating pick swap in one of the other drafts. So,
and I think one of the big things there is just the opportunity cost of like, you only have one time that you can really take that swing and go for this third guy. And are you sure that Lauri Markkanen is that guy? You know, like I would probably prefer OG Anunoby, for example. I think there's a handful of other guys in the league. I would probably, if you are trying to make that big swing and get that third guy and you're willing to include Keegan picks, whatever, like, I think it's also just important to consider the opportunity cost of maybe there's better options than Lauri for that package.
Wow. I didn't expect us to go, well, I guess we are 38 minutes into the pod.
See?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that we have to discuss because, I mean, certainly the Kings, like, they have to be mulling over all kinds of internal discussions at this point about how they can improve this roster and where they're at. And, you know, Kevin Huerter scored his career high 30 with that incredible three-pointer against Denver, which, again, was Keegan, like, finding him, passing it out to him. And
before that, though, it was Fox who missed 2, but got his hand. He tipped it to
Barnes,
to
Keegan
yeah.
Yeah. So, but the point I'll bring up when it comes to Fox, I mean, when it comes to Huerter, is there's this funny thing that happened in the locker room, and it happened in post game where they started that Monk has been making fun of Huerter for being afraid of scoring 30, because Herter's way too good of a scorer to not have scored 30 points at least one time in a 5-year career up to this point. And so they had been messing with him, like, oh, you're afraid of 30. And Fox actually said that Monk messed with him the same way in college and said, oh, you're afraid of 40. And he couldn't get over the 40 bump, right? I kind of feel the same way when it comes to 5 games over 500. It's like the Kings are afraid of 5 games over 500. They've now been to 4 games over 500 5 times and fallen in each of those games. And it's this moment where you're either like what Sean always says, basically a 500 team, or you're a team that can go 8 or 10 games over 500 and start to build. And it feels like they just can't get over that hump. They're afraid of that hump. And I kind of feel like the Kings might not be good enough to get over that hump without help. And that's where I'm right. That's kind of where we're at.
But
I
I
don't
feel
think
like
that's shocking.
yeah, that's. I think the shocking. There's nothing shocking at all. It's like the next step for this team was learning how to be a relevant, competitive basketball team that's capable of winning, and they knew they had glaring holes on this roster and guys that need to play better than they are, and for things to go right. And then you're hoping to be able to upgrade certain positions, and you're hoping for guys to blossom into something that kind of fits the timeline of this basketball team. So it's an all-in moment for them once they went with Sabonis and took the pressure off of Fox solely. So now you just have to build around it. It's something that takes time to do. It doesn't happen overnight, but for this team, it essentially did once they added some shooting to this team. You're hoping to be able to use trade deadline, even these moments of being able to bring in people. You're not even able to sign 10-day contracts still until, when is it, later this month, right, James?
That's a good question. I'm going to look that up really quick. But yeah, I mean, that's the next discussion we have on the table, right? Which is, the Kings have January 7th coming up, and it's the date that you have to guarantee contracts for the rest of the year. And the Kings actually have 3 guys that are sitting there at this point that you're not sure. You're not sure what they're going to do with those contracts. And that is Dellavedova is owed $2.6 million this year. So roughly half of his contract will be guaranteed by this point, but the other half would like after January 7th. You've got KZ Okpala of $1.9 million and Chima Moneki at $1 million. And we'll make this a business of basketball discussion because this is a major business decision in addition to like just a general discussion, right? So like if you just guarantee Chima Moneki's contract, you hold up a roster spot, but you're looking at like $500,000, which in NBA standards, that's like, that's absolutely nothing. I mean, the Kings would, like, if they had to waive Chima, which I don't think that they will, and I hope that they don't because he's a fun dude to have around. But if they had to, like if they were making a 4-for-2 swap and they had to clear up a roster spot, even if you guaranteed his money on January 7th, it's really not that much money to waive someone after that fact, right? So like, and I'm not like, even if it's not Chima Moneki that's attached to that roster spot. So if it was Jamias Ramsey or Robert Woodard, we saw the Kings do it a couple of years ago where they had paid those guys and then just waived them. And actually Robert Woodard, they owed a whole nother $500,000, I think, for this year, where they're paying him this season. Robert Woodard's making $500K from the Kings because they had already guaranteed his third-year salary. So anyway, my point is that with Chima, like Chima's going to be on the roster after January 7th. I can almost assure that. And then the same, you can look at KZ Okpala at $1.9 million. You're like, okay, you're looking at $900,000 now for that second half, but he's only 23 years old. He has played valuable minutes here and there for you. He does have a skill set that fits. And then the other one is Dellavedova. And like, I don't know, what do you guys think? There is value in having a open roster spot, especially when you get to the trade deadline, especially when you have a $4 million trade exception that expires on February 8th from Halliburton, and a 1.6 that expires on February 10th for Bagley. So you could actually use that roster spot to go get something else.
I mean, I think we've heard a lot of people rave about Delly's value, even just in practices and like the energy he brings. It's hilarious watching him do sprints during timeouts when he's probably not going to come in the game, but he's like the definition of staying ready. And I think in the minutes that he's gotten sporadically here and there, like he's done fine. I think that he looks serviceable. I think that Charlotte game early in the year when De'Aaron went down, Delly played a solid role. Like, I think that he's still capable to contribute on the floor and spot minutes when you need him to. And I think that's all you're really asking from a third string point guard. And we've just heard people rave about the value that he brings in practice in just kind of challenging the other guards and just being a consummate professional. So I think that Delly brings more value than like the minutes that you see on the floor.
No, for sure. I mean, he's an extension of the head coach as well. He's definitely understands the system. He understands what's expected. He understands what's like to be a professional. Those things, I think, to the average listener would go like, well, that should be an expectation, and you're right. But there are people that fall short of that, and you need these types of players on the team to show what it's like to be a professional, to the stay ready mentality, the taking care of your body, and to be able to play the long game, because it is such a long season, and you don't know what happens when injuries strike. And fortunately, I mean, all you have to look at is what Domantas Sabonis is doing, and playing through an injury. Keegan Murray playing through essentially an injury as well. De'Aaron Fox has done it at times as well this season, and plenty of guys are banged up. I mean, even Trey Lyles, who Trey Lyles, Malik Monk, they've all been kind of nicked up with various different things. So it's going to take an entire team effort from this team. And you're right, James. I think identifying Monecki, who's essentially spent the entire season so far with the G League, and I think that's a great thing, because he is seeing what it's like to play at another level. He is seeing what it's like to play in a Mike Brown system, and he's more so than just what was used to international basketball, more of the NBA level. And being able to talk to him just a couple weeks ago, right before the showcase took place down in Henderson, Nevada, the constant feedback he's getting is crucial. I mean, they're all over him. So they've invested a lot in a player who's essentially only going to have about $1 million on the season.
It's only $1 million, and the next year it's only
Right.
like 1.8. Yeah, I mean, basically, they gave away their 2 second-round picks, and this is why, because they were going to sign Chima Monecki, or one of the reasons, because they had an idea that they were going to go chase him, and they're using him as if he's a second-round pick, which I think is totally legit, and I think like he's got enough promise. He does enough, right? We talk about the Kings needing a Brandon Clark type player, and Chima's only 6'5", 6'6", so he's not Brandon Clark, but he's kind of like a 2-3-4 version of a more like flexible player defensively, more switchable, if you will. And maybe he can't do all the things, and he needs plenty of time to get like up the refinement. But that's it. The energy, the physicality, that's the type of player you're looking at. A guy who can get you crazy shot blocks, a guy who can posterize somebody, who goes above and beyond on the defensive rebounds and offensive rebounds. So, I mean, he's worth at least gambling on for this season, and I would be very shocked if he wasn't not only here this year, but if he wasn't part of some of the idea for next season.
Yeah, and I think right now, before they go and really start making big moves or any kind of thing, I think they just have to wait for certain dates to pass. And I know we kind of talked about that a minute ago, but I also would like to see what this stretch of basketball looks like for the Kings, because we've talked about how they're coming back to Sacramento. They've got a relatively easy schedule for the rest of January, and we talked about that a couple weeks ago, where I think at the end of the day, going into that 6-game homestand where you're playing, I think it was 14 of 16 at home, I believe it was. James, is that right? I don't have the schedule in front of me.
Yeah, a 6 and a 6, right? Or a 6 and a 5. Let's see. So right now they've got the Jazz on the road. Then they come home for Hawks, Lakers, Magic, Rockets. So
yeah, it's
5
like 12
games.
and 14, right?
And then Spurs and I can't read my own writing. Oh, Lakers. And then Thunder.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again,
Yeah.
it's like this is that stretch because of the way that road trip went right before the 6-game homestand. And yeah, you go 3-3 on that 6-game homestand, and you're probably fortunate to do so. I mean, when you think of the way that homestand really went, This is a stretch that at the end of the season, the success of the failure of the season, you'll look back and go, how were they able to capitalize off of this opportunity that takes them through January? Because the months ahead, there's a lot of road games. They're going to be steep opposition. So I think this is going to be a very crucial month, not only just for the roster itself, but I think this is also where the front office really dives deep and figures out what the course of action is going to be right before that trade deadline and ultimately the All-Star game that comes up in February as well.
Yeah, and I think just real quick, go back to that whole like they are just flirting with or allergic to this 5 games above 500. Like if they're just a 500 team, they won 30 games last year. And to jump to 41 is a huge jump that you rarely see happen in the NBA. So I think that in itself is a success. And anything you get on top of that is great. And you still need to figure out a way of like, how do you improve from that mark? Because obviously that's not the ideal finish point or ceiling of this team. But there's reasons they can look at, there's fairly young guys on this team that you can expect internal growth from some of these guys. And you have pieces to go out and maybe take one more big swing. So I think just the perspective of like they won 30 games last year. So I think already the improvement we've seen is a massive success.
Yeah, I just think the expectations this season are different. And, you change the age dynamic and everything else. And like, look, so the Kings are basically, they're 3 games over 500, but they have a 543 win percentage, right? And I don't know what that works out, but I can tell you like pretty quickly, like a 543 times 82 is 44 and a half wins, right? But this team, if they can crack that number where they start getting 7, 8, 9 games over 500, that's where you start to build and, you start looking at a much higher win percentage or a sustainable 543 win percentage. Because there's a big difference between 543 at 82 games and 543 when you're stuck and you can't get over the hump and you're game 35 but you can't get to that like 7 games over or 8 games over. Anyway, it's interesting. We're gonna learn a lot, but I also say like this stretch right here where again we'll just say the Jazz, the Hawks, the Lakers, Magic, Rockets, Spurs, Lakers, Thunder. That's 9 games where if you can like launch yourself. And if De'Aaron Fox can look like the De'Aaron Fox we saw in the first 6 weeks of the season, now you're looking at a team who is thoroughly entrenched in the playoff picture at the end of January, going into All-Star weekend, heading towards the All-Star break. And that's where we can start to really have a conversation about, is De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis All-Stars? Is just one of them an All-Star, which at this point, if one of them makes it, it would be Domantas, in my opinion. But if 2 of them somehow you can squeak in 2, it's not because you're 4 games over 500 or 3 games over 500. You need to be fully entrenched in the chase. And so I think this is a huge, huge stretch, not just for the standings, but also for individual achievements that could possibly come this team's way, which would actually mean something.
Those 9 games, right? You're talking 9 games ahead. Yeah. Is it out of the question to say you have to win 5?
No, I think
that's the minimum.
You need to win 7.
I would put it at 6. I think if I was to guess right now, I'd say the expectation is that you win 5. I think they win 6.
Okay.
And if you win less than 5, you could be doomed.
Yeah. No, I would agree with you, Sean. Like if you can't figure it out right there, you're in trouble. Like
it's hard to go 7 of 9. I don't care who you're playing against. So 6 of 9 is something that I think is doable. 5 of 9 to me would have to be the expectation. And if you're, like I said, if you're below that, that's some tough sledding.
At least, like I said earlier, they're 10-3 against teams below 500. And to be honest, that Charlotte and Washington games like left a really bad taste in my mouth. Those kind of scared me. And it was like, okay, this team is still capable of like playing down to their competition and just totally losing games that they absolutely should have been more competitive in. And sometimes those are going to happen. Sometimes there's just outlier nights. You can't hit shots. I think that was an aspect of it. At least one of those games is sometimes just shots aren't going to go down. But I think it's the little things of making sure you're rebounding, not turning the ball over, getting back on defense that those games really scared me. So if only one of those blunders would have happened, I'd probably feel a little bit more confident going into this. But I'm with you guys on this, like 5-6, but they really do need to make sure that they take care of business against the teams they're like quote unquote supposed to beat.
Okay, so I'm just gonna, as part of the business of basketball, let's just go through it really quickly.
Was that an overreaction, by the way, saying that they should win 7 or that you put the number at 7? I was going to say that's quite an overreaction.
Well, no, I mean, especially you're talking about like they need to split the road trip, which would mean that they somehow find a way to beat Utah, right? If you can't find
Or find another one.
six wins out of the Hawks, the Lakers twice, the Rockets twice, the Magic and the Thunder and the Spurs, if you can't find 6 wins right there, then I don't know that you're a playoff team. Now, I mean, realistically, at the end of the day, because the schedule gets a lot more difficult after that. This is the stretch of the season where you can look at a bunch of games at home, a bunch of games against opponents that don't really care to be in it, and I think that's part of what you're looking at there. Okay, so let's just is Chima Moneki on the roster after January 7th?
Yes.
Yeah.
KZ Akpala.
Probably.
Yes.
Okay. Matthew Dellavedova.
I don't know. I have no idea.
I'm going to say yes to Chima, yes to KZ, and I'm going to say it's going to be hard for Dellavedova to make that date.
Are they? I
And
think
it's not
the
about
way
salary. People should understand that. This is not about salary.
No, it's not like they're being cheap or frugal
No.
or trying to cut corners. No, it's for me. It's almost a okay. If not him, then who? Right? Or are they doing? Are you saying that in the sense that you expect a trade before then? Which obviously I don't think that's going to happen in the next 5 days.
No.
So
no.
like, to me, I don't know. I just don't think. Maybe they've identified it as somebody else. I mean, we can go back. I didn't expect him to make the roster back in the summertime, so I was wrong there. But I just don't know. I don't know what the cards
Yeah.
hold for someone like him.
I mean, you have Trey Burke at Stockton. Like,
Right.
if you need to sign him to a couple of 10 days, or if you need to sign him to a couple of 10 days, as you're coming into the trade deadline, and then figure out if you still have a roster spot afterwards, and then make sense of it then.
I'm convinced DJ Stewart is a third string point guard in the NBA eventually.
Convinced, huh?
Well,
I think he's a bucket.
I would say this. The only reason the Kings need a third string point guard is if De'Aaron Fox is going to be out long term, or if Davion Mitchell is out long term, or if you're going to trade Davion Mitchell at the trade deadline, which, again, I'm not saying is going to happen, but like, if all options are open, to improve the roster. And so that's one of those things where you're looking at like, okay, I could see where this player may or may not be here, and that you might need Dellavedova, but
Or in a trade if you just need to make some money work.
Yeah, but giving 1.3 million away
Yeah,
that's a lot more money than 500,000.
You could send cash.
I guess. Yeah. I mean, I think it's going to be up in the air. I think it's going to be up for discussion because, again, Keon Ellis and Neemias Queta, for me, they're not going anywhere. They're going to be two-way players this entire season, which means that you can't really pull up DJ Stewart without clearing a roster spot. And sure, you could
Right.
give him a 10-day contract, or you could sign him to a non-guaranteed deal at the end of the year, like what they did with Chimezie or what they did with Damian Jones and all that stuff. But I still think it's one of those. You're kind of torn. Like, I don't know what they're going to do with that position. Okay, that was our business of basketball discussion.
Wasn't it great?
I don't know. Yeah, like, it's interesting though, right? There's a lot going on here. There is a lot going on. Do we have anything for Tuesday overreactions that we should be overreacting from? Like, I'm not overreacting from a big rebounding night when you're the best.
Can I
defensive
say?
rebounding team
I'll
in
say
the
this:
league.
like, for as well as I think the Kings have played this season and shown to be a competitive team and yada yada yada. We've talked about that. I think my overreaction would be I think this team is kind of clunky. I think I've used that a couple terms already, like times already. I want to see. Obviously, you've got Mike Brown back. Jordy handled things admirably, and that was great. This team probably needs some practice time. I know they were home for the holidays, and that we saw what that went like. It was certainly some difficult moments at times, and
Yeah, you called that the distractions of home. Yeah.
Right. Now that that's in your rear view, and I think getting out on the road, even if it was only for two games, I think it will be a good thing. Even if they went 0-2, like just get out fresh, get away from all the stuff that was around the holidays. Hopefully you come back and you've got a little bit of practice time during this stretch, and hopefully they can find themselves again. I feel like they've kind of lost some of that mojo, if you will. And so, I think that if there was an overreaction, I don't think that that they've completely just become a different team than what they've shown to be already this season. And we've talked about the being 3 games over 500. You've got a little bit of equity there, so that's a good thing. But you're coming up at a point where there's going to be an expectation for you to build upon that equity. So I think maybe the overreaction to me is maybe this is a team that's kind of lost their way a bit, and they're going to have to tighten some things up and really kind of hammer home. And Mike Brown's got a pretty difficult task in front of him if they're going to do so. So, take advantage of the schedule ahead of you. And I think if there was any overreaction, I'm just wondering if this team is a little different than what we've seen.
I'll build on that a little bit of, I guess, my overreaction. A different angle of it is just that this team is still pretty bad defensively. And I don't know if that's an overreaction, if it fits amazingly, but I think there were times we thought that they were better. And I still think that this team is good enough offensively to win on any given night, but they're bad enough defensively to lose on any given night. Like, they gave up 120 to the Lakers. They gave up 125 to Charlotte. The 125 to Washington, and then Utah 125, the Denver games or whatever. That's one of the best offenses in the league. But I think that this team is still really bad defensively. Davion Mitchell and KZ Okpala, and KZ has his shortcomings on the offensive end that limit his opportunity. But Davion Mitchell is the only guy out there that I feel like is actually bothering people. And Fox can turn it on in the fourth quarter. Harrison Barnes does okay. Sabonis does good for his limitations. But this team still has a lot of work that needs to be done defensively before I think we're actually talking about anything in top 6 in the West.
That defensive player of the game chain should be named in Davion Mitchell's honor. I mean, that should be his chain. And I know he won it for the first time just a couple days ago, and he made it back to back, but he's the best thing going defensively on that team. And I'll say this too, I think, there might have been a little bit of fool's gold. I mean, you had won 7 straight at one point. Of course, your defensive rating is going to go up. That's to be expected when you win 7 straight. You also win 7 straight because you were capable of playing a little bit of a defense as well, and it wasn't just outscoring opponents. So it wasn't completely fool's gold. But I think they've shown what they can be capable of on that end. I think they have made vast strides. I think there is really positive momentum there, but over this past, since they got off the road trip, really, since they came home for the holidays, things have just kind of looked a lot different from what we've seen in various portions of the season.
I think we're seeing this team, they're stuck in a lull. And so we look at the road trip, they were 3-3. The homestand, they were 3-3. So realistically, they're 6-6 in their last 12. Before they lost the other night. So they're 6-7 over the last 13. If they somehow find a way to scrap out a win against Utah, again, 500 over 14 games, it's kind of who you are right now. And I think this team needs a jolt. And I think the schedule will help, but the schedule will flip at another point. And you got to find a way that if you can go 7-2 or 6-3 over a stretch, that there's going to be another point where you're going 3-6 or 2-7, and you need to, if you want to be better than a 500 team, I feel like this is a moment where you got to get right, but also where they need to actively be searching out and finding the right player to fill the void that's glaring with this team. You need another shooter, you need a shot blocker, you need another rebounder. If you could package all of that into one player, then that's amazing. If you can't, then you need to. Like you can't go through the rest of the season without having all of that, because it's going to limit who and what you can be. These teams that are, sort of rope-a-doping around the 500 mark, a little over 500 right now, that are really good teams. The Clippers, who just started to win a couple of games, but you're going to see Dallas probably start to pick up a few more wins, barring injury to Luka, and then all bets are off. But there are a lot of teams sitting right around where the Kings are that are just kind of not taking the regular season serious right now. And the final 25 games of this season, the Kings need to be primed and ready and firing on all cylinders. And I would, like, if you got an opportunity to make a move at game 35 or game 40 and improve your roster greatly, that just gives you more time to acclimate that person into what you're trying to do and into your system and into your, like, specifically on the defensive end. Like, if you can get better defensively and do it now. Don't wait. Like, that would be my opinion. But I don't know. Team unity does mean things. Not wanting to screw up a 6-game or a 5-game homestand coming up, that's also something. But at some point, you know what they need. Just see if you can go get it, go get it.
They need their version of the Christian McCaffrey trade.
Ooh,
Yeah.
boy, has that been amazing.
No, but
My gosh.
no, you're right. That's spot on. Like, if you want to be a 7, 8, 9, 10, then that's fine. Stay right where you're at, because that's probably where you're going to end up. If you want to really cement where you have been, the 4, 5, 6, then you have to have, like, their version of that trade is going and getting Lauri Markkanen or going in and getting OG Anunoby, like swinging for the fence to add the third big player that they need. That takes care of the problems now, not long term. I mean, not on February 8th or whatever it is, February 6th, whenever the trade deadline is. I mean, there a lot can happen between now and then, and I'd rather have a player already in my system, already rolling, when you get to that point, than someone who still has to learn what's happening and might be able to make some sort of difference in the last 25 games of the season. Cool. All right. Do we have any final thoughts? It's starting to rain, Sean. I know you're probably
Really? Because I'm
shedding a
already
tear.
It's been pouring out here since we started. Maybe it's just making its way up the hill now.
It might just be making its way up the hill. It was cold this morning and last night. Last night I was surprised, although it's only 50 now. So it warmed up a little bit. So that's not super cold for, like, I'm not going to get snow is what my point would be.
No, it's
But
not that cold yet.
I'm worried the lake just keeps overflowing, and like they can't force the water out fast enough.
Ham's Navy is going to be just fine. I think your boats they all float, right? They'll be okay.
They'll float, take on a little water here and there. Although the pontoon boats, they don't take on water. So, yeah, we're okay there. Sweet. Do we have any final thoughts?
I will make a request for our comment section. We are getting to trade season, and everybody always wants to say, I want to trade for X, Y, and Z player. I just want people to also include, who are you willing to trade? Because I feel like this isn't included often enough. And there's I want to trade for this person, but no way I'm including Keegan Murray, or no way I'm including Davion Mitchell. And it's okay, what are you willing to trade? So
Be reasonable, be honest. Yeah.
And to that point, Brendan, we spent a lot of time talking about Lauri Markkanen, and it's like, okay, yeah, we know what Utah, we know what they're doing, but we get the situation that they're in with, like, acquiring all these picks and probably not trying to compete all of a sudden. But here they are, kind of a somewhat relevant team in the West. They've shown to play better than what most people expected. Why are you just going to give away Markkanen? You're not going to just give away Markkanen. In fact, if I'm them, I'm probably inclined to probably keep him. That's a pretty nice piece there that you can. It's not expensive. He's going to be extension eligible. He fits a timeline. Might be a little bit older than what they'll look like in 3 years, considering them wanting to be in the mix for a Wembanyama possibly, or younger draft picks, because they've acquired so many. But you can also move those draft picks and be right where the Kings are with these players that are anywhere from 23 to 26, 27. So the path of the NBA can switch very, very quickly, is all I'm saying. And I'm using that one as an example because people have obviously taken a liking to him. He's having an all-star type season. He's a very nice player, but in order to, what is it? You got to spend money to make money.
All right. I'm thinking here. Like, what are you going to give up? It's a good point, Brennan. Like, maybe
Very
give
good
us
point, Brendan.
Yeah, give us a couple of trade ideas. Like, if you were going to do something, what is the package? Because I think there's only two ways to get a player like Laurie. One of them is with Keegan Murray. One of them is with 2 first-round picks. And in order to get the 2 first-round picks, you're either offering 27 and 29, which is really far off for a team like Utah, or you're going to call the Atlanta Hawks and try to work something out there and free up your, a 26 and 28. That there's a big difference between a 27 and 29 and 26 and 28 for a team like Utah. I think that they would trade him, especially.
Oh, I think they would, but they're
At this
gonna
point, yeah.
expect they're just not like pennies on the dollar here. Like they're not
Oh,
going in there.
no.
Go ahead and fleece us just for whatever. It's like no, they're Danny Ainge is a cutthroat businessman. I mean, obviously we know he loves picks, so I'm just saying.
Yeah, and I'll also point out too, like the cool thing about Marketing is that he signed a full 4-year deal, so he's actually like extendable. There are things you can do with him down the road, and he's under contract for 2 more years after this year. So he's even under contract a year longer than Sabonis at this point, and under a very, very affordable price. And then you start getting into the back end of Fox's deal. Like it's one of those contracts where you're looking, okay, like he's so manageable now and next year and the year after, that makes him even more valuable. So like it's going to cost a lot if you're going to go chase someone like that. But like we talked about it during the draft, like Chet Holmgren, I thought was a perfect fit next to Sabonis. And like, that's a guy who probably was way more offensive upside than a guy like Chet Holmgren, and can do a lot of things. So yeah, intriguing. I don't know. Okay, are we wrapped up? You got final thoughts in? Sean, did you get final thoughts?
No, not really, but Happy New Year, 2023. I mean, that was I had I think 2022 people probably enjoyed for the most part, and we hadn't been able to say that for a while. So, yeah, 2023 hopefully is bigger and better for everybody, Kings included, because it makes everything we do a little bit more relevant in the scope of things. And yeah, just kind of looking forward to seeing what these next few weeks and months have to play out. I did see, James, I think I mentioned to you off the podcast, but for those who like to hear the movie stuff that we talk about, I did see the Banshees of Inisherin, I think is how you say it, Inisherin.
Yeah,
That
it's
Colin
good, wasn't
Farrell
it?
and Brendan Gleeson. Yeah, it was very different. I think I really liked it. Brendan would have absolutely hated it. I don't think he's got the patience for that type of movie, because he just falls asleep. He's a sleepy boy.
Did you go see Babylon?
Me? No.
No.
I did not.
Yeah. Okay, so Babylon is like
I'm going to take Brendan.
an epic 3 hours, and it's super, super fast paced, like
And
crazy
long, right?
fast paced.
Yeah.
3 hours long, but like it's an exhausting 3 hours. You get done, you're like, okay, that was a lot of movie. There was a lot going on. I thought it was a little overindulgent for the first like 45 minutes, but it settled in. I thought it was pretty impressive. Is it
I've seen some awful reviews of that movie.
either
I
awful
think I
or
showed you a
great
few.
though? Yeah, I mean, some of them are like,
Which is
I think
crazy,
it's
because I
still
really
like a
like those.
60 or 70, right, on like Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes. Yeah, it's still.
I think
it's still up
so.
there.
Yeah, like the director Damien Chazelle, love him. La La Land director Brad Pitt, Margot Robbie. I heard, what is it? Tobey Maguire is pretty fantastic in it. So
Oh yeah. Very small part, but yeah.
I want to see it. But then when I saw those reviews, literally the Chronicle, the San Francisco Chronicle, the guy, he says, "I effing hated." Why did I just say that myself? I just do it. He's like, "I effing hated Babylon," and he called it the worst movie of 2022.
That's interesting. I don't think there's any way it was worse than like Black Adam, or like there are plenty of movies that were not very good in 2022. Let's see. Okay, so my final
What's the last good movie you saw that involved The Rock? Asking for a friend because I can't think of one.
Jumanji? I don't know. Like
Like the first one?
The second one, yeah, maybe, I don't know.
There's been some bad ones though.
Yeah, there has been some bad ones. Let's see. Okay, so my final thoughts. Yeah, Happy New Year. Never too high, never too low. I highly recommend if you want to see a Sacramento Kings game, then go buy tickets now because every game has been a sellout for the last 8. The fans have been off the charts good. Like, I think the fans have just been absolutely spectacular trying to carry this team, even through some drag losses, some really rough losses. I think they've still been incredible. Outside of that, like, let's hope for everybody like a healthy year. I mean, we've been through like a whole lot as a whole, all of us, the last like 3 years. So hopefully, we have a better 2023 than we have the previous couple of years. Cool. You guys
Yeah.
are good?
Yeah, hey Brendan, we made it. James didn't say hoot this time, so I was really kind of hoping for a 2 for 2, but I thought he was going there with the games. The other games have been a real.
No, the
Games
games have
have
been
been a hoot.
incredible. The games have been incredible. I don't know what you're talking about, Sean Cunningham. Trying
No,
to
they
mess
have.
with me.
They
Oh,
have. They've really been
my
good.
other thing. Let's see. I'm walking into tonight my fantasy football Super Bowl.
Oh,
I'm up 7.07.
points.
I have my kicker, which is T-Bass, so I can yell "kick his ass, T-Bass" every time he kicks a field goal.
That catches
And
on.
I'm going up against Devin Singletary. So I have a 7-point lead and a kicker against a running back.
So when we reconvene later this week, James will be either happy James or very, very sad James.
Right.
Yeah, because Sean was there when I lost the Super Bowl. That was during the
Didn't
lockdown.
I was like, oh, you got this.
Oh, you got this. You
Oh,
got
you're
this.
fine.
I was up 80 in a standard scoring league, and the guy had a wide receiver and Josh Allen on Sunday night and on Monday night, and I lost by 3.
He did not have this.
Josh Allen scored like 46. Just kept throwing touchdowns long after they had already like drubbed somebody. Yeah. So we are here at the Ham House. We're looking to put another championship ring on the mantle here.
And
We'll see
another
what
boat on the
happens.
water. I know how you all
Another
are doing
boat on
it.
the water. Yeah. No, probably not. Unless one sinks. Hopefully not. All right. Well,
Get out
that's
there,
going to do
skipper.
it for this. Yeah, that's going to do it for this edition of the Kings Beat podcast. If you're still watching, give us a thumbs up. If you're listening somewhere, give us a rating and review. We totally appreciate it. If you drop by games and want to say hi to us, just
No.
send us a message and see if we can at least say hi. But, like Sean says, no,
I'm
I'm
busy.
fine saying hi to people. We are busy. We're busy at games. But Happy New Year, everyone. And thanks for tuning in to the Kings Beat. So for Brendan Nunez from the Kings
Oh,
Pulse
got me.
podcast and Fox 40 Sean Cunningham. I am James Ham, your Kings Insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. See you later this week.